Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of each of our hearts be acceptable. May they be delightful to you this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, when you think about the passage that Marie just read, we aren't really told exactly what happened at Pentecost. We know the disciples had waited to be endured with the power from on high, waited on the promise of Jesus that they would be given spirit power. Spirit power to give a witness. We in the church call it the Great Commission. That is the last recorded personal directive of Jesus to his disciples, of Jesus to us. It's the foundation for what we call evangelism. But evangelism is not convincing other people to accept the propositions you believe. Evangelism is about inviting other people to begin a relationship with Jesus, to go on a journey with him, to make his story their story. You know, the so-called tongues, well, they were natural languages. Of those in Mesopotamia, Judea, Asia, Egypt, Rome, etc. I had to repronounce all the other ones. Nothing says that it was some heavenly language, some language that was not known and used regularly. They were simply foreign languages. God gave them power to speak to those in their own language, so they could hear the gospel, so they could be saved. And you know, salvation isn't just about going to heaven. Many Christians view salvation as a ticket to heaven, or at least as an insurance policy, just in case there is a heaven. But such a view only scratches the surface of this great biblical truth. In the Bible, the Greek word translated to save, sozo, means more than to be delivered. It literally means to be made whole, to be healed, to be restored. It's not that we're divorced from God, but rather alienated, estranged from God. It's like being in the same room with another person, but so consumed with your own agenda that you either are unaware or uninterested in the blessing that can come from a relationship with the other person. The salvation relationship is one where we are delivered from bondage of sin and death, set free to grow with God into the whole persons we were created to be. That's biblical salvation. It's a reconciled relationship with God, whereby we are transformed from fear to faith, from hatred to love, from bondage to freedom, from death to life. The salvation relationship is one that continues into eternity, to be sure. But the relationship begins now. We don't only grow towards salvation as if it were a prize for which we have a ticket because of some magical prayer. Rather, we are bold to claim that we grow in salvation. To put it another way, we do not see salvation as a dot. It's not just this moment in time that I can point to, you can point to. It's more like a line. It's a process. It's a journey. There may be a beginning. Some of you may remember it. But that initial sense of salvation is not the end of the process. We are being saved. We are called to work out our salvation and knowing that God is at work in us. We grow into salvation. And ultimately, it's experiencing strength and hope in our daily lives and in our ministry. We need salvation in our ministry. But growth requires waiting. Waiting to be endured. Not passively waiting, waiting actively by sharing stories of remembrances. Sacred stories, godly stories, Jesus stories, Spirit stories, higher power stories. And remembering Jesus' promise. The power comes from on high. And it's for the purpose of giving a witness. So that others may also experience salvation. And this is where I believe we in the church can learn from others. Others who have experienced a relationship with a higher power and who participate in fellowships that develop what I call responsive relationships. Helping embrace one's own sacred identity. Their experience, strength, and hope comes from sharing what I believe are sacred stories. Their language, just like what happened at the Pentecost, their language may sound different. May sound different than the language we typically hear in the church. But if you listen to relate and not compare, I believe today we will hear about humility and powerlessness, both of which are instrumental as we practice re-signing a season of Pentecost. Now, I've asked a couple of gentlemen, both Larry and Carl, to join me up here at the table. Similar to last week, like we did with Joe and his sharing of a powerless fatherhood and made him comfortable on stools. I tried to make them comfortable as possible. They each have their own coffee, just the way they take it, I hope. Larry has a basket in a lot of our fellowships. Larry doesn't have a basket. I put a basket here to make him feel comfortable because in a lot of our fellowships, people throw a butt in the plate. Neither do I. Sorry, you need my butts. I don't know what we really do with this thing, but I put it there because it's there. But anyway, these are two men for whom I have great respect. And with the help of their higher power, they, along with other people in this room who are here to support us today, they introduced me to a God. They introduced me to a God who cares about me personally. And they continue to help me embrace my own sacred identity. Welcome, guys. Larry, you all know pretty well. Hopefully you're going to know more about him today. Carl Kohlmeyer. I said, yeah. Carl is from Carl's a good friend of ours. We participate as well as some other people in the room in the same fellowship. So here's my concern, guys. I'm looking for a little help with this. That is, sometimes I wonder if we in the church come together with the recognition that God has actually brought us together with a common interest, with a common need. Because sometimes it seems like we come to church out of some sense or form of guilt, some moral obligation, or because we think it makes us really good Americans. I also think that this idea diminishes our ability. We struggle at times to share why we go to church. Sometimes we even struggle to share about our faith. So I want to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences of participating in a formal group of persons gathered together for a common interest and a need. And also, this is the fun part, how do you tell others about that group? I mean, how does someone hear about the kinds of groups y'all go to? I mean, are they some secret club? Are they a secret society? Who wants to begin?
So I guess I'll start. I give a little background. I was raised in a Norwegian home, a little Norwegian home, and there was this story about this Norwegian man who loved his wife so much that he almost told her. And that's the way it was. I mean, there was no direction. I never saw my parents touch each other. I don't know how I was conceived, but anyway. And that's kind of the environment in a nice home. You look at Charlton, for example. I lived in a house similar to what you might see in Charlton, very nice schools, all the rest of that stuff. But it seemed like we went to church at 11 o'clock, we came back at 12 o'clock, and we never talked about it between 12 o'clock and the next 11 o'clock the next week. When I had my first drink at the age of 18, it was literally a gift from God. It took this scared little boy and made him into a man in a matter of seconds. It took every fear, every apprehension that I had and helped me deal with life. And right from day one, when I drank, I got drunk. I didn't drink every day at that point in my life. But I went through this journey of probably 20, 25 years, being a good father, raising 4 wonderful children. Yet alcohol was always a part of that journey. And I went to work every day, never missed a day of work. I fired from 2 jobs because of alcohol, not because of drinking on the job, but because of what I did in my performance and how fearful I was. One of my jobs was collecting money, and I was afraid to ask people for money. I got fired from another job, and we had all that first job. We just bought our first house, had a beautiful little house with a horse and all the rest of that stuff. But when I got fired from that job in that small town, running a feed mill, I told my wife we had to get out of town. Then we moved up here in the geographic cure and worked for a while, and then, again, it was about being a salesman and asking for an order and all the rest of that stuff. And as that progression happened, I consumed more and more alcohol. I was drinking pretty much daily at the time. And I was a pretty good father. I was a lousy husband. I didn't know how to be a husband. And the more I drank, the more I stayed away from my family, the more I stayed away from the duties. But the things I did with my children was I did a lot of things with my children, but I did all of those things with my children under the influence of alcohol. I did not get it at DUI. I deserved 500 or 600 of them. And I don't understand this disease like that. I really don't. All I know is about God. Everything I did in my life as it got toward the end of that journey was based on blaming others for why my life was in the direction it was. It was always somebody else's fault. I did some awful things, and I'm going to tell you what they were because it'll tell you the desperation that I got to. I tried to kill a man in front of my children with a club. Out of jealous rage. The only reason I wasn't prosecuted was because I was a good father and my ex-wife would not turn me in. The day before the last day I drank, I beat my 8 and 9-year-old sons who were coursing around at bedtime just doing nothing wrong. I was drunk. I was drunk a lot. And I was so frustrated, I was so unable to deal with any kind of feelings and emotions, and alcohol wasn't working anymore. So I was drinking, and so how did I get to this fellowship that we talked about? because I had drinking friends. I had a daughter-in-law who was a gutter drunk. And I saw her, and she was 2 years sober, and she had gotten sober in AA. I'm not making any secret about what we're talking about. We were talking about Alcoholics Anonymous before I went there. And if you would ask me about God at that point in time, I would have told you there wasn't any. Because if there was a God in my life, how come I was drunk and my life was a mess? And it's funny because the other thing, I had a drinking buddy from the Army who we drank together because that's what we did and that's what I like to do. And he had gotten sober through AA. And I went over to drink with him. I went to visit my mother and went to drink with him, and he told me that he wasn't drinking anymore. He had joined this cult called Alcoholics Anonymous. And he told me a story, and I didn't want to get out of there any faster. There was nothing there for me to drink, so I had no interest in being there. And but I never forgot what he said. The thing that got me to stop drinking was not the fact that I beat my 8 and 9-year-old sons. It was the next day when I was going to do it again, and I saw the terror on their faces. And that image will never leave me. So I go into this meeting, and that's how I got there. Word of mouth.
Thank you. Before I'm going to turn to Carl with the next question, and before I do, one of the things popped to me in Scripture, and we smiled at each other. I'm not sure Paul had it quite right when he said these gentlemen can't be drunk. If you can't be drunk, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. So I want to know a little bit about, I want to hear from you a little bit about the 12 steps that the founders of AA discovered. We have a slide. I don't expect you to catch the crossover here, but we have a slide, and it shows the biblical relationships. It's a little hard to read. I'm sorry. Try to get it on one page. It shows the biblical connection to these 12 steps, but besides the point, that's besides the point. Have you found that they make the process easier to follow on a personal journey toward healing? And can you tell us maybe a little bit about the first 3 steps?
First, when we start, my name is Carl, I'm an alcoholic, and that's how we generally start a meeting. I don't think we should have it any different, despite the fact that we're sitting up here. When Tom asked me to do this, I was a little awestruck by the fact that he was looking for me to do something based around spirituality. The 12 steps, to break it down, it's very simple. There's 3 steps. The first 3 steps are we admit. The second is we turn our lives over, and the third is we make a decision to. Am I saying that right? I'm not saying that. Came to. We come to, and then we come to. Came to believe. Right. I'm saying that wrong. A little nervous. The initial piece of what really makes the change for me, and I had somewhat, like Larry, had been inundated with a lot of different things around alcohol and drugs, and I had been introduced to 12-step programs because there's not only just AA, there was NA that I was involved with also, which is Narcotics Anonymous, and when I was introduced to these people, they would, tell me that there's these simple steps that I have to follow. All I have to do is follow these steps, and my life can possibly change. Now, where my life was I'm not going to go into detail, but where it ended up, I was on the Bowery in New York, and I had been in and out of many drug and alcohol treatment programs. But all these people, AA, were always there saying that these steps are going to make a difference in your life. So what are these steps? First step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, our lives becoming manageable. 2, we came to believe that power greater than ourselves could restore it to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand. And as the most important piece of that for me was grasping that we part, that there was something more than just me. The selfishness that I had within my own addiction kept me from including people in my life. To the point where I distanced myself and I had lost everything, somewhat of Larry saying, I lost family members, I lost children, I lost relationships based on my addiction. And that the only way that I was ever going to get anything where I was going to have some peace within myself, or have a spirit within myself, was going to be grasping these steps. And again, the first part, and the most important part that I've always found in the time that I've been in AA, is the first step, that we admitted, okay, that we were together, that together we could do this journey and find a way out, okay? Not that there's a way out. And that I can make some change and I can actually be a real person. I am not the person I was 33 years ago, right? And that's how long I've been clean. But I am not so far removed from who that person was. And the thing that we collectively together is we keep each other from going back to that person. I don't ever want to have to go back to that person, but I'm only one drink away from being that person again.
Let me pick up right there. You nailed. The next thing I wanted to ask you all about is this one day at a time concept. The principles behind the 12 steps represent a progressive healing that not only help heal the body and the mind and the soul. And I love this quote from the big book. You can go ahead. Oh, we got it. This is not the quote. I'm going to read the quote. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. The point is we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Growing along spiritual lines sounds a little like the way I was trying to describe salvation earlier. A process, maybe with an identifiable beginning, but that initial sense of need and acceptance is not the end. That idea that we are being saved, that we are being called to work out our salvation, knowing that God is at work in us. What does it mean to either one or both of you to claim progress and not perfection?
Well, the interesting thing about how this journey started was one of the things they said when I first went to my first meeting was, "We're glad you're here. Keep coming back." Let me tell you, folks, nobody ever said that to me. They were not glad for me to be around. They didn't want me to come back. And so that was a whole unique concept of we're really happy you're here. Keep coming back. And as this journey began, all of a sudden I was 24 hours and 48 hours, and that was incomprehensible to be sober 3 or 4 days in a row. That doesn't exist. But they said keep on coming back, and it was this welcoming and I rejected an awful lot of this God concept. The other concept that they talked about was asking for help, getting a sponsor, and then getting something like almost like being in a training program to become a plumber. You learn from somebody who's been a plumber for a longer period of time, and that was totally alien to me. I just us men, we didn't ask for help. That's just the way it was. That was weakness. And so I kept on showing up, and I just kept on coming back, and I listened to this God stuff, and it just totally did not matter. But I kept on going. And I listened to the people who were around longer than me. And it was just a shared experience, strength and hope that was incredible. And at the end of 6 months, I wasn't sure I wanted to stay sober, and so what happened was, by their sharing their experience, a lot of people who had gone back out again, and that's not unusual in this disease, when they came back, this theme was always the same. It's going to get worse. And all I could see was the picture of those 2 boys. And so I stuck around. And I kept on coming. And at the end of the year, if you'd asked me how I like being sober, I said, this is the best thing this is the greatest decision I've ever made in my life. And then I'd go home on the couch and cry. Because although I listened to the experience, strength of hope of other people, I didn't follow through. I didn't follow the next series of steps, which means you got to have a guide. If you're going to walk from here to Indiana through the woods, you've got to have an Indian guide to get you there. And that's what I needed. I needed that experience. That's where that came from, that person who was going to help me. And it's funny because I was just with this guy yesterday. He's a multi-millionaire. I was poor in the church mouse when I came to the program. And he just saved my life.
And you've reached perfection.
Yes, absolutely. Progress, basically it is. Everything was based on what the people before me said. And I struggled. I was a young man. I was in a program with people that were, if I looked around, all of them, I was 25 when I first started to get sober. When I first got sober. And I looked around the room, it was, 40, 50, 60-year-old men, and I'm like, what do these guys got that I want? They're not giving me something out of their pocket, it's like, I don't want it. But I did find something in what they said. And I gotta be honest, when my first year of staying sober, I truly did not want to stay sober. I was just looking to get cleaned up for a little while so I can go back out and try it differently. And that was my history. Go back out and try it differently. Because it was always everybody else's fault. It was always my family, the judges, the jobs, whatever. It was always somebody else's fault. And in being with these people, I got to see that. I identified with and they identified with what I was saying. That they were the same as me. They all had the same people they were blaming. And that they didn't, they found a point where they didn't have to blame anymore. And that's where it came. I didn't have to blame people anymore. And that I could start looking at, okay, things are different. Right? That I didn't have to do this perfect. There was nothing about doing this perfect. There's nothing about AA or NA or anything that's perfect. But all I want to do is be able to change a little bit. Sometimes I take 2 steps forward, sometimes I take a step back. But again, it goes back to that whole thing that I don't want to be that person. One of the things I say when I go to meetings, I keep coming back so I don't have to keep coming back. Because I kept coming back, and I kept getting worse and worse and worse. Every time I went back out, it got worse, right? And I got worse. I didn't trust me. I wasn't born on a Bowery, I wound up on a Bowery, right? So the progress part came from hearing what people said and saying, I like what that person says, and I like what they do. I was a person who came in, I didn't know how to do anything other than drink or drug. I wasn't, a sports person, I wasn't, a socialite of any kind. I didn't know how to, function with other people. In a setting that you would function with people. So I had to learn how to do it. And these people showed me how to do that. Right? And I was like, okay, I like this. Okay, I can do this. This is okay. It's nice. And I feel better about myself. And I can move on to the next step and move on to, because beyond those first 3 steps that we taught, there's other steps that come in where I have to start doing some work. There's real work that comes involved, where I have to start taking ownership of everything that I did that got me to where I was. And it's hard. It wasn't an easy process. And that's where the progress versus the perfection comes in. That, I'm willing to do those other steps and move forward and accept responsibility for who I was and what I've done.
We have 2 more things I want to catch, so I'm going to move us along quickly here. But Carl, I'm going to stick with you because I know, I know you really got a handle on that God part.
Oh yeah.
And you have this preaching sensation. So no, tell me a little bit about the God part, because it says that it says that we can't do it ourselves.
Okay. And Tom and I have had some talks, all right? I'm not a religious person. I'm not a big churchgoer. I've tried many churches and not been comfortable in any of them. But that being said, I do have a belief in God. I do have a belief in higher power. How do I get that? Again, I get that through the people that I associate with, the people that I fellowship with, the fellowship of AA and NA, and it's because they show me that there's something more than me driving the bus. There's something more than, you know, I really don't know how to. I really struggled with the church piece, and I'll share just a little story. I went to a rehab way up north, and most of the people in the rehab were Bowery people, just like I was. And you know, the typical AA or alcoholic or, you know, drug addicted person is like, we're going to do anything. We're going to make anything look good so we can get out of this to clean ourselves up. So everybody all of a sudden that I was in treatment with was going to church. Everybody's going to church. Everybody's going to church. And I'm like, I ain't doing this church thing. You know, I just ain't doing this church thing. And this place was run by Franciscan friars. And at one point I'm either going to leave treatment and go back and just do what I do, or I'm going to talk to somebody about something. So I went to one of the friars, and I asked him, I said, listen, you know, I feel like if I don't do this church thing, you know, I'm not doing this thing right, and I feel like I have to do it, and I don't feel like I can do it. And he just looked at me and he said, you don't have to be in church to be with God, because God is with you all the time. He said, God appreciates you if you go there, you know, and you respect Him, and, you know, and that you're fellowshipping with other people, just like you fellowship in AA or NA, all right? But that you don't have to be there. You just have to believe in something. And I was able to take from that. Now, beyond that, after I got out of treatment, again, I tried different churches. I got married. My wife was born again church. I went to the born again church. I was an usher in church, but I just could not. For me, I just couldn't accept it. I don't take it away from anybody. I think it's a great thing. But for me, I have how I get my spiritual uplifting, all right, or how I get it is from AA. You know? Because these are the people who, you know, and how some people come in and they don't believe in God at all right? And so we just say, okay, well, just use the word God as a group of terms, you know, and you can use that to get you to the next place that you need to be spiritual. And so do I have some spirituality in me today, despite what some of my friends might say, okay? I believe I do.
I'm gonna watch, because you remind me nobody gets saved after the hour. I will want to say, in future we'll talk about what I think is miraculous about this fellowship. And what I think is miraculous about what Carl just shared about the church is that we aren't perfect. We don't always get it right. And maybe because we didn't get it right, two gentlemen received some sort of power, some spirit power to develop a whole nother fellowship that could speak in a language that some of us needed to hear. And yet what my hope is that these two fellowships will continue to grow together and respect one another and learn from one another. I'm going to bring us to a conclusion of this part of the worship. In the Bible, the disciples asked Jesus, why do you tell stories? He replied, you've been given insight into God's kingdom. You know how it works. Not everybody has this gift, this insight. It has been given to them. And all Jesus did, we're told, is went on and told some more stories. His story-telling fulfilled a prophecy. I will open my mouth and tell stories. I will bring out into the open things hidden since the world's first day. Are your stories really that important? If so, why?
Stories are the, you know, I was raised so much that, don't talk about that, what will other people think? Oh, that drives me crazy today. Because one of the things the stories in AA did for me was tear down this wall that I'm different than everybody else, when in fact I'm just like all of you. Maybe you didn't drink and drug. But we all got some other crap that we're carrying that, shh, don't tell anybody. You know? It's the stories of, I mean, how did I end up here? 10 years sober. You know, 10 years sober, I got made, man. You want to learn how to stay sober? You just talk to me, and I got all the answers. My sponsor had drifted away. I didn't have a support system. I was going 6 or 7 meetings a week. I was Mr. AA. And then all of a sudden, I got my hand at the door of a bar. I still was disregarding this stuff.
Before we got hell and crap, so.
Really?
My higher power at that time was nature. I would go by a creek and I would talk to nature. But after that thing of 10 years sober, I had driven by this church many times. And I decided to come here. And you know what I got? The same thing I got at an AA meeting. We're glad you're here. Keep coming back. Thank you.
Larry also just moved us to something that's taken me a long time to learn, is that am I here 12 years? In the pastoral. That in my 12 years, like you at 10 years, I think I have it all together. But I don't. The season of Pentecost is a way for us to take the professionalism out of worship, the professionalism out of sharing stories. Put it back in your hands where it belongs, in the worshippers' hands. And we'll have an exciting week coming up in the future. But I'm going to wrap this up by saying, recognizing our need for the Paraclete, a great fancy name for the Spirit, means we are never alone. We are never abandoned, never at the mercy of the world. The Paraclete, witness, not just witness, but witness, enables us to live our lives to the fullest, to face our greatest fears and to become more than conquerors of life, conflicts and confusions. Embracing powerlessness in life enables embracing a God-empowered life, and likewise embracing a powerlessness in ministry will enable us to embrace a Christ-empowered ministry. Now let's pretend we're in one of those born-again churches. Can I get an amen? Amen! You guys, we thank you. They will be around. I was going to have time for questions, answers, naturally. Larry's pushing on the no one gets saved after the hour. That's our motto in the other meeting, and we're close to that hour, so we got to get to communion. I invite you to return to your seats, and the ushers to come forward, please. Thank you, gentlemen.